There is a particular kind of dream the human imagination keeps returning to. The dream of the world after the world, the silence that follows the sirens, the empty motorway where the traffic used to be. We are drawn to the apocalypse not because we want it, but because some quiet part of us needs to know what we would become once everything familiar had burned away. Would we rebuild, or would we simply endure? Hi, this is Movie Blanket Club, and today we are counting down our picks for the 20 greatest post-apocalyptic films ever made. Bring a blanket. You may want something to hold on to. 20. Waterworld, 1995. Every list needs a film the world agreed to laugh at before it ever agreed to watch it, and this is ours. Kevin Reynolds directs Kevin Costner as the Mariner, a mutated drifter navigating a drowned Earth where the polar ice has melted and dry land has passed into myth. For a time, it was the most expensive film ever made, and the chaos of the production became a better-known story than anything in the plot. The weaknesses are real. The pacing sags, the villainy is cartoonish, and the mythology strains under its own budget. And yet, viewed now, the world-building is committed in a way modern blockbusters rarely dare. Floating cities lashed together from rust, a whole economy built around a handful of soil, a society that has forgotten the ground. We would argue Waterworld has aged into something better than its reputation, an ambitious, waterlogged oddity that believed in its own sunken planet completely. Not a great film, perhaps, but never for a moment a boring one. 19. Delicatessen, 1991. If the apocalypse has a sense of humor, it sounds a great deal like this. The debut of Jean-Pierre Jeunet and Marc Caro unfolds in a crumbling French apartment block after some unnamed collapse, where food has become currency, and the landlord downstairs runs a butcher's shop with a very particular supply chain. Dominique Pignon plays a former clown who rents a room and falls for the butcher's short-sighted daughter, unaware that he is being fattened for the menu. The film is deliberately peculiar, and its dream logic will not suit everyone. Narrative is almost beside the point here, but the craft is dazzling, and the comic timing is exact. A Rube Goldberg symphony of squeaking bed springs and creaking pipes, staged with silent cinema precision. We would happily defend it as the most inventive vision of scarcity on this entire list. Proof that even the end of the world can be played as farce, grimy, gorgeous, and entirely its own strange creature. 18. A Boy and His Dog, 1975. Long before The Wasteland became a franchise, this scrappy cult curio was already picking through its bones. Directed by L.Q. Jones from a Harlan Ellison novella, it follows a feral young scavenger named Vic, a very early Don Johnson, and his telepathic dog Blood, wandering a nuclear desert in search of food and women, roughly in that order. The film's sexual politics have dated badly, and its final punchline is as cruel as anything the genre has produced. We will not pretend the misogyny sits comfortably, because it does not. But its influence is impossible to ignore. The sardonic tone, the buried underground societies, the loyal animal companion all echo forward into Mad Max, into Fallout, into 100 lesser imitators. We include it as a fossil worth studying rather than a film to embrace. The missing link between 50s, atom panic, and everything the wasteland would eventually become. Rough, mean, and oddly essential. 17. The Book of Eli, 2010. The Hughes brothers deliver the wasteland as scripture, and few films on this list look this handsome doing it. Denzel Washington walks west, across a scorched America, guarding a book he will kill to protect, while Gary Oldman's small-town tyrant hungers for it for reasons of his own. The bleached, desaturated photography is beautiful, and Washington brings a coiled stillness that anchors the whole enterprise. The screenplay leans on a late twist that some find profound and others find faintly ridiculous. Your reaction to the ending will probably decide your reaction to the film. We come down on the generous side. Beneath the shootouts, There's a genuine argument about faith, memory, and what a civilization chooses to preserve when it can preserve almost nothing at all. Not every beat lands, but the conviction never wavers. A quiet, violent parable that means every word it speaks. 16. Le Dernier Combat, 1983. Luc Besson announced himself with a debut that dares to say almost nothing at all. Shot in stark black and white, and very nearly wordless, a catastrophe has robbed humanity of speech. It follows a lone man building a small aircraft to escape a ruined city, crossing paths with a kindly doctor and a brute, played by a young John Reno. There is scarcely any dialogue and even less explanation, and viewers who need their plots spelled out will find it a trial. That restraint, though, is precisely the achievement. Besson turns an obviously tiny budget into an asset, letting empty concrete and gray sky carry a loneliness that speeches would only cheapen. We would say it remains one of the purest visions of collapse ever committed to film, a mood poem about isolation that trusts its own images entirely. Spare, eerie, and quietly unforgettable. 15. The Quiet Earth, 1985. New Zealand contributes one of the strangest empty world films you will ever encounter. Bruno Lawrence plays a scientist who wakes to find himself seemingly the last man alive after a botched global experiment, free to loot mansions and lecture imaginary crowds until the solitude begins to curdle into something like madness. Jeff Murphy directs with a melancholy that sneaks up on you. The middle stretch loses some momentum once other survivors appear, and the underlying science is frankly gibberish. But the opening reels are a masterclass in dread, and the closing image, one of the most beautiful and baffling endings the genre has ever offered, has haunted viewers for 4 decades. We place it here for that final shot alone, a vision so peculiar it feels lifted straight from a dream, underseen and quietly magnificent. 14. Snowpiercer, 2013. Bong Joon-ho takes the apocalypse and lays it on its side, running it along a track. After a failed attempt to reverse climate change freezes the planet solid, the last of humanity survives aboard a perpetual motion train, the poor crammed into the tail while the rich feast at the front. Chris Evans leads a revolt carriage by carriage, with Tilda Swinton unrecognizable as the regime's grotesque enforcer. The allegory is anything but subtle, and the film knows it. The class metaphor is the whole engine. A late burst of exposition nearly stalls the drive, but the invention never flags, each new car a fresh nightmare, and Bong's command of tone is total, lurching from horror to black comedy without missing a beat. We would call it one of the sharpest science fiction parables of its decade, brutal and bleakly funny at once. Ride it to the front and see for yourself. 13. I Am Legend, 2007. Here is the loneliest blockbuster ever made about the last man in New York. Francis Lawrence directs Will Smith as Robert Neville, a military scientist who spends his days hunting for a cure and talking to shop mannequins, while infected creatures claim the night. The first hour, with its deer grazing a grass-choked Manhattan, is genuinely spellbinding, and Smith carries long, silent stretches on charisma alone. The digital monsters have aged poorly, and the studio ending famously betrays the far braver conclusion the story was reaching toward. We would gently urge you to seek out the alternate cut. Even compromised, the central image of one grieving man rattling around an emptied metropolis is impossible to forget. We rate it for its solitude far more than its scares. Flawed, certainly, but devastating in its finest, quietest moments. 12. The Day After, 1983. Not every apocalypse arrives with a hero, and this one arrived on television and frightened an entire nation. Nicholas Meyer's made-for-TV drama follows ordinary residents of Lawrence, Kansas, before, during, and after a full nuclear exchange between the superpowers. It is not a thriller, and it offers no escape hatch. It simply shows what would befall farmers, doctors, and students once the missiles fly. The production values are dated and a few of the performances are thin. None of that finally matters. When it first aired, More than 100 million Americans watched together, and the broadcast is credited with shifting the political conversation around nuclear weapons at the very highest levels. We include it as history as much as cinema, a work whose power lies precisely in its refusal to look away. Bleak, essential, and impossible to shake off. 11. On the Beach, 1959. The oldest film on our list is also among the saddest, a hushed farewell staged at the very end of everything. Stanley Kramer directs Gregory Peck, Ava Gardner, and Fred Astaire in the story of Australians awaiting the radioactive cloud that has already erased the Northern Hemisphere and is drifting slowly, inevitably south. There are no monsters and no last-minute rescues. Only people deciding how to spend their final months, falling in love, racing cars, pretending the sky is not falling. Modern audiences may find it stately, even slow. That patience is its devastating weapon. By refusing spectacle altogether, Kramer makes the coming silence feel unbearably intimate, almost domestic. We would say no film has ever rendered the close of the human story with more restraint or more grief. A slow, dignified heartbreak of a picture that lingers for days. 10. Wall-E, 2008. Trust Pixar to make the most tender film ever set on a dead planet. Andrew Stanton's Marvel opens on an Earth buried in rubbish and abandoned by humanity, where a single small robot has spent 7 centuries dutifully compacting trash and slowly falling in love with the very idea of company. The opening 40 minutes, almost entirely without speech, rank among the finest passages in all of animation. Pure visual storytelling that needs no dialogue to break your heart. If the film carries a weakness, it is that the later stretch aboard the human cruise ship trades some of that magic for broader satire. We forgive it without hesitation. What lingers is the sight of a lonely machine reaching out for a hand to hold amid the ruins of our own carelessness. We would call it the most beautiful environmental warning ever filmed. Tiny, near silent, and close to perfect in its opening act. 9. Planet of the Apes, 1968. Few endings have detonated across popular culture quite like this one, and the film that earns it is far cleverer than its camp reputation suggests. Franklin Schaffner sends Charlton Heston's astronaut crashing onto a world where intelligent apes rule and humans are mute livestock, a premise that could have curdled into kitsch and instead becomes a stinging fable about prejudice, faith, and the arrogance of our species. The ape makeup remains a genuine marvel, and Heston's sweaty fury is pitched exactly right. Some of the 60s philosophizing creaks a little, and the pacing is unhurried by today's standards. But the closing image on the beach, which we will not spoil, however famous it has become, reframes everything before it as a warning we authored ourselves. We would rank it among the genre's true landmarks. Bold, brainy, and still able to land its final devastating blow. 8. 12 Monkeys, 1995. Terry Gilliam turns the end of the world into a fever dream you can never quite wake from. Bruce Willis plays a prisoner sent back from a plague-ravaged future to trace the source of the virus that drove humanity underground, with Brad Pitt, twitchy and electric, as a prime suspect. Inspired by Chris Marker's short film La Jetée, it is a time travel puzzle wrapped in raw anguish, and it steadfastly refuses to hold your hand through its loops. The plot rewards a second viewing and can genuinely bewilder on a first. That disorientation, though, is the whole experience. Gilliam wants you as unmoored as his broken hero. Willis has rarely been better. All haunted confusion and misfiring memory, and the ending snaps its circle shut with quiet cruelty. We would argue it is the most emotionally shattering time travel film ever made. Dizzying, mournful, and utterly unforgettable. 7. Threads, 1984. If the day after Frightened America, this British counterpart set out to traumatize, and it succeeded completely. Directed by Mick Jackson for the BBC, it traces the effects of a nuclear war on the city of Sheffield and two ordinary families, following the survivors not for days, but for years, down into a new dark age of radiation, famine, and slow societal collapse. It is shot with a documentary coldness that grants no comfort and offers no catharsis whatsoever. Be warned, this is one of the most genuinely upsetting films ever broadcast, and we do not recommend it lightly. But its honesty is exactly its greatness. Where other apocalypses flatter us with heroism, Threads insists on the likely truth that the end would be squalid, prolonged, and utterly merciless. We would call it the most important film on this list, and by some distance, the hardest to sit through twice. Harrowing in the fullest sense of the word. 6. Mad Max 2. The Road Warrior, 1981. Here's the film that wrote the visual language every wasteland has spoken ever since. George Miller takes the modest revenge story of the first Mad Max and blows it out into pure kinetic myth, sending Mel Gibson's burnt-out drifter to defend a besieged fuel refinery from a horde of leather-clad marauders. The plot is elemental to the point of being biblical, and the characterization is thin by deliberate design. Neither is a flaw. Both are the point. Stripped of everything but motion, the film becomes a nearly wordless action symphony, building to a tanker chase that remains a benchmark 40 years later. We would argue that without this picture, there is no Fury Road, no Fallout, arguably no modern post-apocalypse at all. It is the genre's beating engine, the blueprint everyone else has been tracing. Lean, savage, and endlessly imitated. 28 days later, 2002. Danny Boyle reinvented two genres at once and made the apocalypse feel horribly plausible all over again. Cillian Murphy wakes from a coma in a deserted London hospital and wanders out into an empty capital. Those early images of a silent Westminster Bridge rank among the most iconic the genre owns. A rage virus has emptied Britain, and the survivors he stumbles upon prove every bit as dangerous as the infected. Shot on early digital video, the film looks rough, and purists will note the infected are not, strictly speaking, zombies at all. We would say that hardly matters. What Boyle captures is the texture of societal collapse, the looting, the militias, the way ordinary men curdle into monsters faster than any virus could manage. Beneath the horror beats a surprisingly tender story about a found family. We rank it as the film that dragged the apocalypse into the 21st century, raw, furious, and frighteningly real. 4. A Quiet Place, 2018. Rarely has the end of the world been rendered with such elegant simplicity. John Krasinski directs and stars opposite Emily Blunt as parents raising their children on a hushed farm, because the blind creatures that have overrun the earth hunt by sound, and the smallest noise means instant death. The premise is a masterstroke, turning every scene into an exercise in held breath, and the near-total absence of dialogue makes the audience complicit in the family's terror. Some viewers poke at the logic. The questions about how this world truly sustains itself are fair ones. In the moment, not one of them registers. Blunt's bathtub sequence alone is a small masterpiece of sustained tension, and beneath the scares, the film is really about the unbearable weight of trying to protect a child. We would argue it is the most purely gripping survival film of its decade. Ingenious, moving, and almost impossible to watch quietly. 3. The Road, 2009. Our top 3 begins with the bleakest and most beautiful of them all. John Hillcoat adapts Cormac McCarthy's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel with unflinching fidelity, following a father and son, Viggo Mortensen and Cody Smith McPhee, as they push a battered shopping cart south across a gray, dying America where the sun has failed and the last survivors have turned to cannibalism. There is no explanation for the catastrophe and no promise of rescue, only the fragile ember the man calls carrying the fire. It is a punishing watch, and its relentless despair keeps it off a great many people's rewatch lists. We understand that entirely, but few films have ever captured parental love with such raw force. The terror of raising a child in a world with no future, and the refusal to surrender decency in spite of it. We would call it the most moving film on this list. A gray, shattering masterpiece about holding on when there is nothing left to hold. 2. Children of Men, 2006. Alfonso Cuarón made a masterpiece that feels less like fiction and more like prophecy with every passing year. In a 2027, where humanity has become mysteriously infertile and society is sliding into authoritarian collapse, a burnt-out bureaucrat played by Clive Owen is charged with escorting the first pregnant woman in 18 years to safety. The film's long, unbroken takes, the ambush on the country road, the astonishing single-shot battle through a refugee camp are among the most breathtaking technical achievements in all of modern cinema. If we are hunting for a flaw, the supporting characters exist largely to push the plot along. It scarcely registers. Cuarón builds a future so textured, so grimy and lived in, that it plays like documentary footage smuggled back from a decade that has not happened yet. Beneath the despair runs a stubborn thread of hope, the notion that a single new life might be reason enough to save the world. We would argue it is the finest post-apocalyptic film of the century so far. Urgent, virtuosic, and unbearably relevant. 1. Mad Max, Fury Road, 2015. And this is where we land. The film we would defend against all comers as the greatest the wasteland has ever produced. 30 years after The Road Warrior, George Miller returned and somehow eclipsed his own legend, sending Tom Hardy's Max and Charlize Theron's ferocious Furiosa fleeing across the desert in a war rig, hunted by the grotesque army of Immortan Joe. It is, on paper, a single 2-hour chase, out into the wasteland and back again. In practice, it is one of the most fully realized action films ever made. A symphony of practical stunts, roaring metal, and startling emotional weight, with Theron delivering a performance that quietly became the soul of the whole picture. If it carries a flaw, it is only that nothing since has come close to matching it. We would call it a genuine miracle of modern cinema and the perfect summit for this list. Furious, humane, and very nearly flawless. That is where we will leave it. Though we suspect you may have other ideas, and we would love to hear them. So there it is, our journey through the world after the world, from the drowned earth of Waterworld to the roaring sands of Fury Road, from the quiet grief of On the Beach to the ferocious hope of Children of Men. If these films agree on anything, it is that the apocalypse was never really about the ending. It is about what we choose to carry through it. These are our picks, not the final word, and we suspect yours would look a little different. So tell us in the comments, which film did we rank too high, and which one did we leave out in the cold? This has been Movie Blanket Club.